Hi there, and welcome to MadPow's webinar series. For those of you not familiar with us, we are a design agency that strives to help people improve their health and wellness, meet their financial goals, learn, and connect. But enough about us. Today, Marli Mesibov, Managing Director of Content Strategy, will share her insights on content strategy for behavior change. A little bit about Marli. Before coming to MadPow, Marli successfully ran a one-woman content strategy consultancy and became active in the UX and content strategy conference scene. She still speaks frequently and brings to MadPow skills developed while working with Motorola, Fidelity, Memorial Sloan Kettering, Cancer Care, and Education First, just to name a few. Being the organized person she is, Marli admits that her favorite moments are watching the client's eyes light up when a project moves from disorder to order, and when the designers and client all suddenly see the pieces come together. So now that you know her, here are a few housekeeping items before we get started. We'll be sure to leave 15 minutes at the end for questions, so make sure you put them in the sidebar as a direct message to me, the host, or to the group. We'll be live tweeting with #MadPow, and slides will be available on our site in a couple of days. Notifications will be sent through our social media channels, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Google+, and we'll also send an email. So be sure you're following us on all channels. There you can also learn about upcoming webinars, speaking engagements, events, and more. So with that, I'll turn it over to Marli.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining today. As Liz said, my name is Marli Mesibov. I'm the Managing Director of Content Strategy here. I also work as the Editorial Director of UX Booth, which gives me an opportunity to see a lot of the challenges that people working in all different areas of user experience encounter on in their daily work. If you've ever thought about contributing to a project that has a content strategy outlook and you're looking for more information on how to get involved with the content strategy community, or maybe you're pretty happy and successful with the work you're doing, then you can reach out to me through either MadPow or UX Booth. We'd be happy to publish you on UX Booth, talk with you at MadPow, maybe do some work together. But today, I'm not here to talk about that. Today I want to tell you about an application that has been driving me crazy recently. So my husband and I, we take turns going to the grocery store. Well, that's a lie. Usually he goes, but I have things that I want him to pick up. And sometimes, if I have time on my way home from work, I'll stop by. And when I get home, inevitably there's something that he says, oh, why didn't you pick up, paper towels or soy milk or whatever it is that I really should have noticed was missing from the fridge, but I didn't. So we realized what we needed was some sort of app that would allow us to both add to the grocery list at the same time and then both see it if whoever was at the grocery store picked up their phone. Sounds easy, right? Sure enough, there are plenty of apps out there that have been created for exactly this purpose. So we picked one out that had some of the best reviews, had all the functionality we needed, made it really simple to use. We used it for about 4 days. And then I couldn't take it anymore. I had to delete it off my phone. The app had all of the functionality we wanted. It gave me all the data that I needed. It was so simple to use. But it kept urging me to tell my sweetie pie what I wanted him to bring home for me. Or to just send a little note with the grocery list to my love. I'm sorry, that's just not me. You can't talk to me that way. I feel like you're making me into a 4-year-old who's also in some kind of Shakespearean Disney princess romance. Like, no, that's just not my life. I don't want you in my daily life talking to me that way. So at MadPow, a lot of the apps that we build are for healthcare. They're significantly more important, and they need to be a part of your daily life, much more so than a grocery list app. For us, for the grocery list, we just switched to Google Docs. No hints, not quite as easy to get to on my phone. Doesn't have the, I have to tap around a couple times. Google Docs is getting better at optimizing for mobile, but it would have been nice to have the thing that you just click on your home page, on the home screen rather, and it pops up with exactly the list and when the items were added. But I'd rather use Google Docs and have it be a little bit more work for me and not have it talk to me like I'm a 4-year-old in love. So for healthcare, we've got lots of data. A lot of it can be personalized, treatment information, things that we want to help people track. We want them to be able to use these apps daily, weekly, maybe even hourly. But the key differentiator always comes into not what it is, but how it sounds, who it is. Because when you're an app, what you are is what you say. We recently worked on a project here at MadPow with a pharmaceutical company that had a particularly tough job ahead of them. They wanted to create an app that would improve the daily lives of people who are suffering from a chronic condition, specifically one that can't be cured. Here's the thing. There are a lot of apps that want to be motivational. They want to help you change your behavior for the better, and as part of that, they want to greet you. They want to be friendly. They want to be sociable. What we found from user research is that people who were dealing with a chronic, incurable disease, they don't want a motivational, happy, sappy, little jumpy person. They need somebody who can understand what they're going through. Now, even that, there are a lot of options within that. Are we talking about a coach? Or it could be a nurse? It could be a friend. These people need all of these, and we need to figure out who they're most likely to listen to and who will get across the things that we need to get across. So this might bring up the question, well, how do you know if somebody is happy or sweet or cynical? Some of it can be in how they act. You know if someone's helpful if they grab the door for you. But you don't necessarily know if they're sweet because they grab the door from you. You figure that out based on the words they use. You identify if somebody sounds educated or stuck up or formal. You identify a lot of those ideas. You put together that sense of their personality based on how they sound. Which brings me to what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to give you a brief overview of behavior change so that you can understand where we're coming from at MadPow when we try to help change people's behaviors. I'm going to do an even briefer overview of content strategy. For those of you who are already incredibly familiar with behavior change and content strategy, and you feel like you know all of this already, just hang on until we get to the case studies, and also please email me because I probably have a lot to learn from you. For the rest of us, hopefully this will give a little bit of insight, given that both behavior change and content strategy are constantly changing fields, and we've found that the way that we do things at MadPow may be different from how a different agency or a different group would do it. So I want today to be about conversation and discussion. I'm hoping to leave a lot of time at the end for questions. But I also want to give you something concrete here. And so we are going to end this up with case studies and also some takeaways for how you can do this in your own projects. Start with behavior change. As Liz mentioned in the introduction, at MadPow, we're focused on design for purpose. We're focused on improving health, financial well-being, education, and making connections between people. A key way of how we do this is through our behavior change team, which is led by Dustin DiTomaso. Behavior change can mean a lot of different things. Our team bases most of their motivational models off of the theory of self-determination, and that is to say that we as human beings, for some things, we have intrinsic motivations. You have an intrinsic motivation when you do something because it aligns with your values. So you value feeling well rested, which motivates you to go to sleep at a reasonable hour. Or you value being able to run 10 miles, and that motivates you to eat enough to feed your muscles. Some of these, so those are sorts of intrinsic motivations, but there are also extrinsic motivations. If it's hard for you to get to sleep at night, maybe setting an alarm or getting points on a leaderboard or being reminded by a friend or having someone to check in with to say, hey, I did this, or even getting a sticker or a gold star. As much as we think that may sound silly and kindergartenish, those are all different ways that we extrinsically motivate each other. Hey, I put a check mark on my calendar every day that I bike to work. It's nice to look back at the calendar at the end of a month and be a little more extrinsically motivated and feel like I've accomplished something. The goal with true behavior change is to move from those extrinsic values, those extrinsic motivations rather, to the intrinsic motivations. And to move from being motivated because somebody's telling you good job to actually identifying how these new behaviors align with your core values. This motivation model is also based on shared psychological needs, including autonomy, which is that values piece, competence, in other words, making sure that people actually have the skills and the ability required, including sometimes the education to know why something is better for you or aligns better with your values, and relatedness, that sense of belonging, of having relationships. That personalization element actually plays a huge piece in motivation in general. And that's where we come back to why content is so important. Sure, we can move from extrinsic to intrinsic values based on design interactions, really. In fact, we should be doing that. But getting that sense of belonging, that relationship, that's built off of tailored content. Another way to describe behavior change that Dustin, our head of the team, actually came up with is that behavior change is the study and application of behavioral, social, and decision science, motivational psychology, and human-computer interaction to the design and evaluation of products, services, and interventions aimed at changing real-world behaviors. That's a mouthful, so I'll try to break it down. It's the study of these sciences in order to design products that become interventions that help us to change. It's really key to note here that we're not talking about gamification. We're not looking to trick people into doing something or manipulate them into acting in some other way. What we're doing instead is recognizing that studies have shown that most solutions, even your Fitbit, don't tend to last for more than a couple weeks, 6 months at best. Gamification, that's part of that whole area that most often only succeeds for about 6 months, and then people fall back into their old behaviors because they haven't actually created lasting habits. They haven't aligned their motivations with their values. They haven't become intrinsically motivated. And so behavior change attempts to create interventions that simultaneously motivate in the short term through those extrinsic motivations and educate and create meaningful relationships. Our design process mirrors the scientific method. We can't start with creating a solution. We have to start by diagnosing the problem. We do research, user research, stakeholder research. We identify the context for the area. We look into the use cases for a specific solution. We look into the use cases for what people are trying today. Then we identify a strategy that takes into consideration all of that research and recommends how we would move forward. Then we execute a design, an actual intervention that upholds the pillars of that strategy. And lastly, we begin evaluation, which leads into new diagnoses of smaller projects and sub-projects. We begin to iterate. And from the content perspective, it gives us an opportunity to test and learn what job does the content need to do and how is it succeeding at that? Is it educating people? Is it aligning them with social norms? Is it reminding them, persuading them? For example, we don't always need to educate. If you ask a smoker if smoking is bad for him or her, they'll tell you, of course it is. They're not misinformed, but they're also not persuaded that they might want to quit. And that moves us into the content strategy piece. This is where we try to build meaningful relationships through how we sound rather than what we say. Christina Halverson, who was one of the first people to popularize the term content strategy, defines it as planning for the creation, delivery, and governance of usable, useful content. That usable and useful piece is what delineates it from just creating any sort of copy that might fit. It's content. It's not just copy. Some of it is help text, messaging. Some of it might be videos, images. We're looking at content as a whole. I like to define content strategy as the tools that get us to bringing the right information to the right people at the right time and in the right places. Particularly when we're talking about behavior change, getting the content in the right place at the right time and personalized to the right person, that's the most meaningful thing we can do. The MADPOW process, you'll see, mirrors that diagnosis scientific method that I identified behavior change. We begin with discovery, we synthesize our information into a strategy, we generate designs and content, we refine it as we test it, and then as we implement it, we continue to evaluate, and you'll see again, just like in the previous slide, we keep coming back to discover more, to revisit our strategy, to generate new ideas, to iterate, to build. The content is across the entire spectrum. For example, during the discovery phase, we need to identify the organizational mission. We need to understand where are our stakeholders coming from? What's the purpose of this app? Ultimately, what are the business drivers? Is the organization looking to perhaps sell a new pharmaceutical or build an app that's going to help people, or just create any kind of solution, whether it's physical or digital or on the phone or messaging and marketing based? Regardless of what their communication channels are, what are they hoping to accomplish and get across? Do they care if it's an app? Do they care what the channel is? Maybe they're looking to create something that will bring together a community. Maybe they're just looking for something that will help people manage their symptoms better. And we have to learn about the audience. With behavior change, we often end up talking about health. We're looking at what's stopping patients from making choices that are better for their health. But it is true as well in financial services, we found. What stops people from being able to save money? Are they capable of it? Do they understand how? Are there methods of retirement funds or savings accounts that would be more beneficial for them that they don't realize yet? Also, we listen to what they sound like. What terminology do they use? What vocabulary do they stumble over? We take that information and we take it to whatever content a site or app or organization currently has. And we start looking at, does the current content show up to the right people at the right time? Is it showing up in the right places? Do people understand it? Is it written at the right reading level? Is it written in terminology that they think about? And that doesn't mean just reading level. So certainly there's an aspect of that where you could say, a $4 word essentially, or you could say a $1 word. And often, particularly in the medical field, in the medical industry and the financial industry, there's terminology that's very complex that we could certainly explain with more simple terms. But there's also jargon. Do you call the person you see when you're sick a doctor, a provider, a healthcare professional, a PCP? And on top of that, what about jargon that's specific to people in a certain area? Do you refer to your illness as your disease, your illness, your condition? If we're designing an intervention that's specific to a certain state, are we going to refer to soda or pop or cola or just a Coke, which apparently in many states also means ginger ale or any other soda? Found out recently. That's the kind of terminology that we need to be listening for and that we need to be analyzing any existing content for. After that, we're ready to create voice and tone guidelines, and these play a huge role in any sort of behavior change design. It creates a brand of sorts, a personality. It identifies who is this person that we're going to be talking to if the app was a person, if the site was a person, if the intervention was a person. What do they sound like, and how does that come across? If they sound authoritative, why do we want them to sound authoritative? That helps everyone on the team stay on the same page. How can we make them authoritative? And what does it sound like to be authoritative? What are some examples of authoritative content? I believe very, very firmly in sample copy for any sort of intervention, because that's the only way that we're going to truly teach other people, other writers who might work on the project, other designers who are going to need to create copy here and there. That's the only way that we're going to get across what's in everyone's heads. Examples go a really long way to getting everyone on the same page. Then we get into actually generating the content. This is that sample copy, the examples, and identifying where is it going to live in an application. Where does the intervention take place? What does the user journey look like? How do we connect with them in those right spots, and what content are they actually going to see? And a huge part of that, of course, is understanding metadata, which is to say, how can we tag content in such a way that it will show up in the right place? So, for example, if we have a blog post about retirement funds, can we tag that post with retirement funds so that on a different page of the site that congratulates you on being ready to retire, it can automatically pull in the 3 most recent articles on retirement funds? Or can we connect those retirement funds to getting a new job as an event in a person's life? Can we email them? Because maybe we're connected to the LinkedIn API and we can see that they just got a new job, and we can remind them to find out if they're going to have a 401k and if they need to transfer an old 401k. Information like that, those little messages, those little blurbs, those little bits of content make a huge difference in terms of feeling that we're speaking to you personally and that we understand you. So I'm getting a message that my GoToMeeting connection has been lost. So this is a great stopping point because we're actually going to move from talking about content strategy into case studies. And so I'm going to disconnect from the meeting for a moment and make sure that I can get my connection back before we move into that. So if you'll stand by with us for just a moment. I promise not to put any elevator music on, but I will keep you updated as we find out more. I'm getting a notice that my connection has been reestablished. Those of you who are writing in notes, could you please message Liz and let her know if you can see the blue slide that says case studies, or if you're still seeing the metadata slide. Well, while we're doing this, some food for thought for all of you out there. Start thinking about, when have you worked on an application that wasn't specifically about behavior change, but still you think that voice would have really helped? And what are some situations where you think that there's not enough content for it to even matter if there's a voice? I will argue that there always needs to be a voice no matter what. But I'm always curious to think, at what point do you guys feel that too little content is not enough to matter? Okay, looks like we're restored. Thank you guys for your patience, and we'll move forward. Now, I mentioned earlier that when we're looking to encourage someone to do something new, a coach might be a good opportunity. This app that we created for Cigna, that is now available for all of their members, is a particularly interesting one in that we very explicitly referred to it as Coach. It is Coach by Cigna. From the very beginning, we said we are creating a coach. And that really drove where the voice was going to go. Now, there's still a lot of opportunities there. Is it a friendly, encouraging coach, or is it a hard ass? Is it a coach who shows how they can do it and that'll encourage you to do it? Or is it a coach like my high school coach who used to send us out for a run and then would drive out and honk at us when it was time for us to turn back? There are a lot of different ways to coach. And in addition, what does a coach do? Well, a coach sets your schedule, tells you when to go do your workouts, recommends maybe what you should be eating or how much you should be sleeping or how else you can take care of your body. And then they let you know how you're doing and if you're up to snuff and what you can do to keep improving yourself. But what does a coach sound like? Is a coach abrupt? Do they take the time to explain things? At what point do they explain it? Do they explain everything up front, or do they wait and walk you through the steps as you're doing something new? How much do they ask questions versus how much do they make statements? These are all the things that we need to consider. And what we ended up creating was a few different options for how our coach might sound, and then we tested them out with the target audience to get a sense for how people reacted to our different coaches. And ultimately, we found a coach who was very directly speaking to you. It's 3 p.m. and you need a pick-me-up, but was constantly sort of using Socratic method. In that way, we were able to really focus on the education aspect, which was very important to the Cigna team on this project, since they're working with members who, in many cases, are encouraged to use this because it's coming from their insurer, but weren't feeling overly excited about it. And so this encouraged them to identify how much they already knew. It motivated them a little bit more, and it helped move them towards their own internal motivations by showing them that they had the capability, that they had the skills they needed. In another opportunity that we worked on, we had a much more subtle character. Not subtle to us. We on the content and design team knew exactly who we were trying to sound like. But the person speaking here didn't have a name, not to the person on the other end of the screen. You might not know it to look at this page, but we designed this voice to sound like Alfred the Butler from Batman. You see, our research told us that people wanted, more than anything else, they wanted something to be able to anticipate their needs. A lot of members told us that they struggled to know what question to ask. And they wanted Siri, they wanted Amazon, they wanted something to just tell them, we see this, we see what you did already, and so we're able to anticipate your every need. And to us, that sounded exactly like a butler. And as we started to dig into some opportunities for how could we be an almost magical butler, we focused on both the level of comfort that you get from someone speaking to you with respect, but no formality, and also having a voice that backed up the interactions. So the interactions on the back end, we were able to put metadata in place so that if you changed your address, the system would know to ask if you want to change your PCP. because maybe you need a new provider now that you'd moved. But we had to measure that, we had to look at that, and at the same time, not stop them, not get in their way if they knew what they wanted to search for. And in our terminology, we wanted to make sure that we gave them enough of an understanding of why we asked things so that it didn't feel random to them, but not so much that it completely ruined the magic. All of that went into the personality that we designed, and all of that went into what comes across when you use the site. I mentioned at the beginning of this talk our cynical yet friendly, realistic coach, friend, nurse, something that we wanted to provide for people who had this incurable disease. In another situation like that, we were dealing with arthritis, which also can't be cured. And so we took a look at, okay, what are people in this situation looking for? And what it came down to was that they wanted a companion. They wanted someone who they didn't need to reach out to exactly, and they didn't have to feel guilty that the person was there. But most people in this situation didn't have the money to hire someone full-time, and they wouldn't necessarily have been comfortable with that even if they had been able to. We started thinking along the lines of a companion. But a lot of companions that you think of are Pollyanna or Jane Eyre. They're so optimistic. There's rainbows coming out their ears. And that just didn't jive with the cynicism that we were seeing and the need for someone who can say to you, you know what? Sometimes it does suck. Sometimes you have really terrible days. And you know what? You're not going to want to go do your exercise, even though you know you might feel better tomorrow if you do, because you're in pain. And so from the voice perspective, we looked first at what that voice would sound like, and we created a Judi Dench-like character. What's funny is then the design team continued to work through iterations of the design, and much later, about 6 months later, they happened across the realization that having a pet rather than a human allowed for a similar sense of personality, but actually made people feel more comfortable because they didn't want to feel as though they were putting someone out. And so we ended up with Dog Judi Dench. So these different methods of how the voice comes across, all at different levels, all with different amounts of how much we're telling the audience who we are versus how much it just comes through in the way that we speak. These play a huge role in putting ourselves in a position so that people can take advantage of the interventions that will ultimately help build their motivation and create a situation where they are intrinsically motivated. In some ways, the voice is another form of extrinsic motivation. That's the hook. That's the catch. That's what helps you get interested and feel invested. But it's also what helps you find your intrinsic motivation, because it educates you. It shows you your autonomy. It shows you your competence. And it builds a relationship, a long-term relationship. Let's look at how you can get started. I've got 4 different items that I'd like to take a look at and that you can walk away with and start using from day one. The first is empathy maps. Empathy maps are, whoever invented the very first empathy map is just brilliant. I mean, these things are amazing. It's so simple. It's focusing on nothing but the experience, the moment. In this moment, in this scenario, on their way to work, what does someone with arthritis think about? What do they feel? What do they see? What do they hear? What are they saying and doing? Now, this bottom section, I've seen it in a few different ways. I've seen it in goals and obstacles. I've seen it as pain and gain. I've seen it left blank. I've also seen an empathy map done for an entire persona, And then the bottom section is specific scenarios to consider, or even edge cases. So there are a lot of different ways that you can do this. I like to focus on, for example, during onboarding with this intervention, or on their way to the doctor, or when they are opening their first bank account. I like to focus on something very specific like that so that we can get a lot of detail and insight into this one moment in the life. But I do also see the value of doing the broader empathy maps. The only thing I would caution you to do is that if you are going for a broader empathy map, try to pull out a couple of specific scenarios to think through to make sure that you're not overgeneralizing. Another great tool is the journey map. Now, I put these 4 tools in this order specifically because although each one can be done independently without any of the others, they also build off each other really nicely. A journey map can be done as simply as taking a bunch of index cards or sticky notes and writing down all of the actions that have to be taken to accomplish a goal. For example, everything, in this case, this is everything from when the doctor says, oh, I want to get your blood tested, to the day that somebody calls and either says everything's fine or everything's not fine, let's look at treatment plans. So that's the journey that we're looking at. And there's no right or wrong in terms of how detailed this gets. I've seen people go as detailed as hang up the phone, make dinner, go to bed, wake up with the kids, drive them to school. As you get more familiar, if you do them frequently enough, you'll start to pick up on which items are more or less likely to actually have impact. So, for example, with having a lab test, is there a connection point to be made when our user, our person here, is playing with their kids? Maybe. So maybe it's worth identifying they play with their kids for an hour before bedtime. Is it useful to know that they read before bed? Maybe. Is it worth noting that they make eggs and then make bacon? Probably not. So those are also things where you can kind of note, you can identify the bigger picture items and then slowly get more detailed until you feel that you're kind of spinning your wheels. But the real key to a journey map is that after you've identified those steps, you can start to identify content touch points. In other words, where can we communicate with them? Is it through sending them an email that they'll get first thing in the morning? Is it a billboard that they see on their drive to work? Is it a phone call? Is it a reminder on their phone? Is it an app that shows reminders? All of these different touch points, even the in-person ones, are worth noting in one area so that when we build an intervention, we can start to pick up those touch points and connect them. This brings us to the next level, sketching storyboard. Now, where a journey might go through a longer period, the storyboard often just focuses on the scenes that we might imagine when someone is using the intervention that we're creating. This is when we start thinking about what are the stages of this condition, or what are the stages of using this application. This is most often a visual exercise, but as a content creator, it gives me an opportunity to start thinking a little bit about some of the conversations that might happen and some of the information that has to be transported. And that gets me to start thinking about where metadata will be useful and how we connect content to those touch points that we identified. This is also a great opportunity. I found that often strategists do journey maps. I really like that visual designers tend to take the lead in storyboarding because it provides a new perspective. You never want to end up, if you are lucky enough to be working with a team, if you're not a UX team of one, you want to take advantage of the fact that you've got these other people. And this is, a short tangent, but essentially it doesn't matter how great your team is. If one person's always leading the team, you're still going to miss out on ideas. So I really enjoy the fact that a storyboard really shifts the power into the visual designer's court, which is something that we don't often get the opportunity to do this early on in the strategy. And then lastly, we get into writing the conversation. And this is where, taking the storyboard, we can now dig in a step beyond that and imagine we don't know what the screen's necessarily going to look like. We don't even know all the interactions we're going to try to do on it. But we can identify what is the series of actions that we go through with the, in this case, mobile app. We can incorporate notes here, as you see we've done here with Grace. We can provide lots of additional information that will keep the entire team on the same page. But it's making that final connection. We're looking back at our empathy map if we have one and saying, how can we impact those thoughts and feelings that we realized that our person was having? And here's where we start to put in some of those details. At this point, I'm ready to take questions.
Great. Thanks, Marli, for that awesome presentation. Please feel free to add questions through our hashtag Twitter or through the sidebar. We'll be answering them now. Our first question is, where can I learn more about behavior change?
Oh, sure. So there are, first of all, there's always a Google site. But I would definitely urge you to check out both Amy Bucher's, that's Amy, B-U-C-H-E-R, Amy Bucher's online blog where she writes about behavior change and design. I would also encourage you to check out Dustin DiTomaso's SlideShare, where he has quite a few talks that he's done on the subject. If you're looking for non-MadPow resources, there are also some great opportunities both within the United States and around the world. There are a lot of clinicians working on different areas of behavior change, and so there's some great articles in on the subject.
Great. Do all apps need to be specific, to have a specific voice?
In my opinion, yes. Now, sometimes that voice will come across more subtly than others. We did work on a really interesting program that was being designed by an organization for their main end users, but we knew that the end users actually had a really negative connotation with the company. And so we didn't want to give the opportunity, we didn't want to create something that really had much personality. But no personality is still a personality. Identifying what your personality is, even if you're trying to be extremely bland, easy to forget, like the character in the beginning of American Gods, if you're trying to be, or Nancy Boys rather, if you're trying to be the most forgettable person in the world, that's still a personality trait. And if you don't identify what that personality is going to be, then you really run the risk of creating a disjointed experience. And that's the worry there. It's not as though if you don't create a personality, you'll just automatically be bland. It's actually an issue. When I first heard Christina Halverson speak, she actually used this example of, she's speaking about branding and voice and tone, and what a great and clear voice and tone Ben & Jerry's has, except for on one page of their site at the time where it just turned into like legalese. And it was like a contact form or something where it could easily have been written in the appropriate voice. And it just completely broke the experience.
Interesting. Another question, do you know of any research where machine learning has been used to personalize content and or rewards for digital behavior change interventions?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't. It's funny, I've seen about 3 different television shows recently that have created machine learning-based AIs. And I love that kind of auto magic because you can kind of say like, oh, it'll just work. But please follow up with me because I'm going to dig into that now and I'm going to see if I can find some.
Great. Should a voice be based on a real person like you did with Judi Dench?
To be honest, usually no. In fact, I forgot to mention this, but our Judi Dench was actually specifically the Judi Dench character from The Last Exotic, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name, Marigold Hotel something something. And the reason for that is people are not two-dimensional. People change. If you think about how extraordinarily upset people are when they find out that a certain celebrity, cheated on their spouse, or that a couple is splitting up, or the loss of trust that we feel when a politician who seemed honest suddenly turns out to have a secret. Characters, on the other hand, are two-dimensional. They are what they are written to be. And so choosing a character particularly a character that is not in sequels, or that is in sequels, but still there's an established set of character traits, is a much easier thing to both align yourself to, and if you are trying to convince a client to move forward, clients love hearing about voice. It just adds that bit of personality to it. But if you choose a real person, then there's a high likelihood that they will have a different perspective on that person than you might, and that gets into really dangerous territory.
Great. And this may have some overlap in your last answer, but how do you decide what voice to use?
Research. Completely based on research. We need to look at, so there are two aspects, there are two main things that we need to look at. We need to consider who's the person that our personality is going to be talking to, and what personality does our personality need to have to further the conversation. And we learn that both by identifying the vocabulary. If we use a similar vocabulary to the one that the person we're talking to uses naturally, they'll be more comfortable with us. So there's certainly that aspect. But there's also, if you're looking to be reassured, there's not just one way that reassuring can sound, but there are a certain subset of characters and personality traits that can come across as reassuring. So the more we know about the audience we're designing for, the more we can specify what sort of personality we're creating. Also, and again, this is more geared towards people working in agencies like myself, when you have a client in the mix, they will have opinions. And now this isn't to say that they should just say, oh, this is who I want to be per se, but we do need to know what is their brand, because we don't want to create a personality that is anathema to their brand. So that really research all around is going to help define that and specify who you should be.
Great. Thank you so much, Marli, for that awesome presentation. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us in that slight Wi-Fi glitch we had there. And that seems like we have all the time we have left for today. But if you have further questions or comments, please reach out to us through Twitter @MadPow. Like I said, slides and video will be available on our site in a couple of days. We'll be sending an email as well as notifications through our social media channels, so be sure you're following us to learn more there. We'll also be posting about upcoming webinars and speaking engagements, events, and more. So with that said, our next webinar will be on April 26th, and it will be with MadPow's Jen Briselli on discovering unmet needs and new solutions through participatory design. So we hope you can join us for that. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll be in touch soon. Thanks, Marli.
Thank you.